This interview is going to blow your mind. In fact, I'm going to put chapters in for every time that I had my mind blown in this interview, because I thought I understood immigration, the nuances of it, and what the challenges were. But during this interview, I had my mind blown. Okay, let's get into it. Let me introduce our guest, Jessie.
Jessie Westover, how are you?
Doing great.
Good.
So tell us a little bit about you and your practice and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm an attorney here in Mesa, Arizona. We cover all of Arizona and actually have clients all over the world, but loved kind of speaking Spanish and what I learned to do. I'm not a native Spanish speaker, but learned how to speak it. And with that, loved interacting with the immigrant community and this and using my language. Is that we're a boutique firm, meaning we get personal service because we're a little bit smaller. I don't have a ton of attorneys, but I do have a few that are awesome and have been with me for a long time, and a staff that's been with me for almost 15 years.
Wow.
And we get to practice all areas of immigration law, which is a little bit different than everybody else. Everybody else that you see immigration attorneys in Arizona, most of them practice a very specific area of immigration law because it's hard. Immigration law, you have to learn, you have to be on top of it. On all areas. And so there's family-based, there's employment-based, there's naturalization, there's deportation defense. And we do all of it just because I like to punish myself. And so I like being able to represent the high maintenance $1 billion company as well as the guy with $20 under his mattress. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, and that makes you the perfect guest for the show because you know all of the different types of immigration and you have experience with them. And just for the people watching, I will say I did my homework to find the best immigration. I'm like, hey, I live in Arizona. Immigration is a huge deal here. I want to find the best immigration lawyer. And time
again,
Jessie kept coming up. So he's a little humble about it, but he is literally one of the best in the state. So
appreciate it.
The one thing that I realized is most people don't have a clue about immigration beyond just the basic concept of it. So what are some of the things that people, like if you wish people knew, what are some big misconceptions or things, maybe just lack of information that people don't understand?
No, it's a great question. And it's something that I love to educate people on because like you said, it's something that we hear immigration, it's talked about a lot and people have their bullet points and their bullet points may be, hey, if they do it, let's do it legally. If they're a drain on public services, whatever the argument, the rhetoric is, or on the other side, it's, hey, we should have an open border country and, these are immigrants that need help and we should be the ones to help them. And there's bullet points on both sides.
Yeah.
I think that the biggest thing that people don't understand is the bureaucracy that we have in the United States and the limitations that we have to immigration and doing it legally, because I'm also a proponent of doing it legally. That's why I started my firm. I want people to do it the right way and I want people to feel good about how they're immigrating and that's the people I represent. But it's not as easy as people think it is. And so one of the things we were talking about previously, but I'll repeat, is that we've got numerical limitations to immigrant visas. So for example, we have very limited ways you can immigrate anyway. Okay. Employment and family basically are the two categories. And we have some ancillary things like asylum and different things, but they're very hard to win and whatever. But on the general sense, we have these two based categories. And unfortunately, with the numerical limitations that Congress set decades ago, with a population that is not indicative of where we are now, has caused an extreme backlog. So on immigrant visas or non-immigrant visas. And so, for example, if you're a U.S. citizen, an immigrant that has become a U.S. citizen and you want to petition members of your family, say it's your brother, sister, or even children that are adults now and your grandchildren or whatever else, if you're from Mexico, if you do an immigrant petition to petition, hey, I want my daughter, Miriam, to come over to the United States. She's in Mexico. She's never tried to come over illegally, but I'd like to petition her. And everybody says, great. Yeah, that's a great way to do things.
Yeah.
Well, Miriam gets her petition and she's got to wait 30 plus years to get that visa appointment.
30 years?
30 years.
That's average?
So that's Mexico average for sure.
Okay.
And that's even going back.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse. It's not getting better. We're not increasing. We're increasing that.
I guarantee you most people have no clue about that.
Yeah. So and the biggest thing that I talk to people about is that we've taken, as the United States, the motivation away from somebody like that. And so if you're by yourself in Mexico, and there are tons of families, I meet people all the time where they have one child is the only one that wasn't able to get residency and citizenship. And it could be for something that was totally out of their control. For example, dad came here during the 80s when we were doing an agricultural program, and he became a green card holder, and he petitioned his wife and his kids, but one of those kids happened to turn 21 before their visa became available, because it takes 5 or 6 years to do it. All the other 5 kids get there, they're 19, 16, 14, 12, but the 21-year-old, they say, sorry, you've aged out of the category, you can't come here. They have to sit in Mexico for 35 years in order to get their visa. Their whole family's in the United States. And so you've motivated them to come illegally. And there's other motivating factors, but that's one of the big misconceptions with immigration is, hey, do it legally and then you're okay. But number one, we have limited ways to do that legally. And then number two, with those limited ways, we've got numerical limitations that cause that to be something very difficult. And I mean, you got to have the patience of Job to be able to wait that long to
30 years. That blows my mind. So you said that's for Mexico. And so I'm assuming other countries it might be less. So if you were to give me an example of maybe you don't have to name a country, but somebody who's in a position where it's a similar situation where maybe it's a brother or a direct family member. Mm-hmm. What would be considered fast in your mind?
So on any of the preference categories, and preference categories are ones that, like, brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens, adult children of either citizens or green card holders, spouses that are just green card holders that are petitioning you. Those are preference-based categories, which means they're subject to the numerical cap. Any of those categories are placed, other than a few countries, are placed in the same category. India, Mexico, China, and the Philippines are all back. They're all backlogged farther. And Mexico's the furthest, but even like Philippines and China, they're still 20 plus years.
Wow.
And the other ones, let's say, like I said, I've got all kinds of family members, but even my own office staff, I have a U.S. citizen, but she's from Colombia. That's my office manager. That's my right-hand lady. She's petitioned her brothers and sisters, and they've been waiting since 2008. So 15 years on that category. Wow. And they're getting closer, but they're still not there. There's
and to be clear, and I'm going to talk to the camera on this, that's going through a immigration lawyer, doing it the right way. Sure. Because we all know that when it comes to government stuff, if you fill out one little box wrong, now you've added another 5 years.
That's my biggest selling point. Yeah. Right? And unfortunately, it's not something I have to sell very often, because I get people coming into the office every day that are like, what happened here? I tried to do this on my own and save some money. And I said, look, we'll take the stress out of your hands on that, because it's bureaucracy like anything else, but especially on immigration, they're really funny about it. And they don't let you correct your mistakes. So if you enter in something wrong, sometimes it's the worst case scenario is they send you to your interview and then they tell you you've done something wrong. And then you're in back of the line.
Back of the line.
I've had that happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
That blows my mind. So you mentioned, the numbers. So certain, explain that a little bit more, how the numbers work.
Yeah, so Congress set a numerical limitation on our visas, both on the employment side and on the family-based side.
Okay, and does it matter what country you come from?
Yeah, so it does a little bit. Like I said, those 5 delineated countries have longer wait times. And the reason behind that supposedly was to help the diversity of the United States and not let a certain country jeopardize and monopolize all of the visas. But no matter what, it's a long wait. There are a couple of categories: minor children of U.S. citizens, spouses of U.S. citizens, and parents of U.S. citizens when a child turns 21. Those categories are considered immediate relative categories, which means they can immigrate faster. There's not a numerical limitation on them. It's still not fast. It's 3 to 5 years probably to do it on, at least outside of the country. If they happen to be here and entered in with a visa, it's a little quicker. But yeah, it's nothing's fast on the immigration side.
So you and I have talked about this a little bit in the past, but if, there's a wide variety of opinions on immigration. The one consistent I've noticed is it depends on who they know, meaning like if they know somebody who's immigrated, how they immigrated and things like that. Well, on one extreme end, and I have one of my good friends, he's like, we should be like Japan. We should shut our border down and not let anybody in, not for jobs, not for family, not for whatever. We should just shut it down. And one of the arguments for that is because of this massive backlog of cases. And this is people who are trying to do it legally. And you just gave an extreme example. Well, I don't even know if it's extreme. Like
It's the reality.
it's reality.
It's very common.
The average for someone coming, especially from those countries, is about 30 years. And then even somebody doing it from different countries, 13, 14.
Canada. I mean,
even Canada.
Scandinavia. I mean, President Trump and his Norways that he wants, or his Norwegians, that's 15 years.
15 years. Wow. So, that argument is kind of like saying, let's pay your debt. Let's get caught up. Why do we have such a bad, why are we hiring so many IRS agents and not immigration? So can you kind of explain how the immigration system works? Like, until I talked to you before we started recording, I just thought that, your regular county, lawyer or not lawyer, the judge or whatever handles the immigration cases, but it sounds like there's a whole system just for immigration.
Sure. No, yeah. So Department of Homeland Security is over what we would call USCIS, which is United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. So they handle green card applications, they handle employment-based applications, they handle citizenship. Then you mix in that with the Department of State, which handles all your consular stuff. So if you're outside of the United States, that's who you're working with. So sometimes you're mixing the two. You're starting with USCIS and you're ending with the Department of State. You have ICE, which is our enforcement body, which is Immigrations and Customs Enforcement that you'll see at the airport and whatever else. You have CBP, which is your Customs and Border Protection at the actual border or at the airport. And then you have the DOJ that has the immigration court under their guides. And so it's not an umbrella with everybody. They're all separated. And there's arguments big time as to how that is delaying the immigration system as well. And certain organizations are funded better than others. And there are, budgetary concerns with each one of them. But as far as the nuances of the system, I honestly don't know why. So for example, a U.S. citizen spouse that is petitioning their spouse, and that spouse happens to be here either overstaying their visa or has come here illegally, but doesn't have any criminal history or whatever else. A lot of people say, well, if they get married, then aren't they automatic citizens? And I go, no.
That's what everybody thinks. Yeah.
And everybody thinks that, hey, once that marriage happens.
Why is that? Where did that come from?
Because they've incurred penalties. And I understand why there's penalties for doing things like crossing the border illegally or overstaying your visa. And those penalties, there's ways to get around them. But for example, we have what's called a provisional waiver, which allows that person, that spouse, to base a hardship argument basically on their spouse saying, hey, if I was to pay this penalty, which is 10 years outside of the United States, here's what's going to happen to my spouse. We're going to lose our job. He's going to have to move with me. I'm family concerns. We have kids. They're going to be without a mom. And we put that, it's like a phone book full of evidence that we submit to the government. That in and of itself is backlogged 6 years.
Wow.
Just in that form. That doesn't count all the other immigration applications that we've done. It's backlogged 6 years. And it was 6 months before COVID, and now it's 6 years. And
wow, that
recent. We don't know why.
You don't know why, yeah.
We've asked. There's been a lawsuit filed, and we have no idea where that backlog came from.
So just since 2019,
absolutely,
it went from average, just for that specific scenario.
Just that one. 6
months to 6 years. Now, it seems like, I hear in the news a lot that there's been a big influx in immigration, that the numbers have skyrocketed in the last 2 to 3 years. Is that maybe part of it? Or?
No, because that's a different type of immigration. I think immigration is covered in a general sense, and there's very specific nuances to immigration. So I think the argument of the amount of immigrants that have come into the United States, most of those are not through the legal channels, because those legal channels have always had the same numerical limitations. So we haven't increased and that's one of the biggest arguments that I would have, is we need to increase our numbers so that we can bring people more, there's more motivation to do it legally and there's more options available.
So let me pause you right there, because I'm asking questions for people watching.
Sure.
So, because, I also have a very simplistic view of immigration. I didn't think it was until I started talking to you. When I hear you say, somebody from Canada take 15 years to get their spouse a citizen, or to be, their brother, or bring somebody in.
Yeah, not necessarily a spouse. I don't want to confuse that, because that's a little bit quicker.
But say a brother.
Yeah.
15 years. Break that down for me. What is causing? Is there like, hey, we're not even going to look at your paperwork for 10 years, or is it just that they're backlogged 15 years? Like, if there was no backlog, and you submit it like electronically, and that day somebody looked at it, how long is the process, even if there was no backlog?
I think there's some nuance to that question, because I think it's a little bit of both. I think there is some bureaucratic slowness,
Okay.
inefficiency, because the actual applications are taking a year to get approved. It's it's a somewhat complicated application, but really it's
Right.
just, is this person in a valid marriage, and is this person willing to sponsor him?
Okay.
That's really what the nature of it is. It takes a year to get that application approved.
And
I don't know why that.
Okay, that could
that
be backlog, or
and
could
then you've
be,
got
are they
your-
doing research,
and then you've
background
got-
checks, or
maybe.
Okay.
They don't tell us. I don't know.
Okay.
I really just think it's just not
doubt it.
enough.
I honestly
I don't know what
We're
that is.
that competent.
So and then the waivers we talked about, those big packets that I talked about taking 6 years, there's no reason for that. That doesn't have anything to do with numerical limitations. I have zero idea why that's taking so long. So there are absolutely things that bureaucratically, federal government being inefficient, which, there's arguments on all kinds of departments for that. And I'm sure they're trying their best. I don't know that, sometimes I hear budgetary concerns. Sometimes I hear we don't have enough employees. I seem to think what ends up happening, in my opinion, is that let me give you an example. This is kind of Jesse's opinion. We had an election year somewhat recently, and we're having one coming up.
Right.
We've got a Democratic president that's in power.
Right.
And the more people that he can naturalize citizenship, the more voters he has. Because
That's what everybody
he's
says,
a little
yeah.
bit pro-immigrant. I mean,
Yeah.
that more than maybe the Republican side, at least on that side of things. And so our naturalizations, I had 3 hearings today. I filed those cases in June, and I have an interview for naturalization in September, 3 months. That's flying.
Wow, that is
Quick.
Yeah.
But my other stuff is way backlogged because those people are becoming green card holders, not citizens, or temporary workers, or non-immigrant visas.
Wait,
They have
people,
a process to become a citizen still once they get here. So
Okay.
that the government, I don't think, is motivated to get their cases done as quick as they are to get people to be able to vote. So I think there's a political nuance to some of that.
because there's one thing about immigrating. Like when we talk about immigration, you can immigrate to the U.S. legally and not be a citizen.
Correct. Yeah. In fact,
So-
you can't even immigrate and be a citizen. There's steps.
So that's my question is, explain to me what the steps are. I mean, to citizenship, like, obviously best case scenario. So let's say a very common, like I have a really good friend of mine. He just came here to the U.S. from India to work for a company. I was going to name the company, but it's a big company. But he came here to work for a company, and they probably hired somebody like you to help him get through and do all that stuff. And now he's here working on what we would know as a green card, is my assumption, or he's working on a work visa.
Probably not a green card, because those the Indian tech industry. It's just probably where I'm guessing he.
So I don't even know the difference between a work visa, a green card, or whatever he might be here
He's
under.
probably on what they call an H-1B visa.
Okay.
That'll last him about 7 years.
Okay.
A lot of times that's transitioned into a green card. So the company, if they choose to, if they really like him, they can spend the money to do a permanent application and bring him in on a green card.
So wait, sorry, I'm going
Sure.
to pause you there. So that one lasted about 7 or 8 years. You said, no, a green card is permanent?
So a green card is it's permanent residency in the United States. So you're getting a green card and you're purporting to pay taxes and live here. You have the ability to live here without an expiration. Now, the green card expires every 10 years. You have to renew it, but there's
Gotcha.
there's nothing to it. You just fill out an application. You don't have to have a sponsor.
Basically just saying, I'm still here, still want to stay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But yeah, so you have to be a green card holder for 5 years before you can even apply for citizenship. So in your friend's case, he's got a long process. He's got several steps. Most likely he's on an H-1B. Hopefully they don't just, expire him in 7 years and send him back to India, because that's something that's common. But if they really like him, they may transition him to a permanent residency. But let me give you another thing that's going to blow your mind. So on the permanent residency, on the employment-based side, we were current on our visas. So if that company wanted to petition him for a permanent residency, there's a big, long process they have to go through. They have to recruit here in the United States to show to the government, to the Department of Labor, that there are not people that want that job. So they have to advertise it. They have to go through a process of certifying the company. Before they even identify the employee, they go through a process of certifying the company to say there are not people domestically that want to do this job that already are citizens or residents of the United States. So they go through that process. It takes a year or two to get through that process. Once they certify the company, then they can petition foreign labor. And then they could identify your friend.
Yeah. Right.
That used to be, once we identified the friend and did the I-140, and we might premium process it to make it go quicker. The government will take their piece, $2,500 to premium process a case. That visa used to be available for about the last 4 or 5 years immediately, meaning that case was then ready to process for a green card. In May of this year, out of nowhere, we had a retrogression. So India, specifically, because you mentioned your friend, they retrogressed more than a decade.
Wait, what?
So if he was to do that process right now, in fact, I had Indian clients who were ready for their consulate appointment, like within weeks, and their consulate appointments got canceled because the visa was no longer available, and it retrogressed not 6 months, a decade. So they're in 2000.
So you're using a fancy word, retrogress.
So they backed up, they backlogged.
Wait, so it's backlogged 10
not
years.
available. Yeah, and not just, what blew me away was I had to call my client and say, not only can you not get your green card in a couple of weeks, which we expected, you're going to be stuck in India for 12 years.
What? Even though they have a job and the company's saying
everything's certified, everything's approved, there's no more visas available.
And you don't know why that happened.
And what blows my mind away is how did we go from current to a retrogression of 12 years?
That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. I mean, I understand little backlogs when you start to run out of visas, but I don't know where the failure was. And there is a big uproar in the Indian community. It doesn't make national news because it's not a community that's very well represented. But yeah, and the India specifically, because they use a lot of our visas on the tech industry.
Right.
So our high-end visas, which are H-1Bs, they require advanced degrees, master's, bachelor's, doctorates. And those visas are very limited. There's a numerical limitation again to those visas. And that specific countries, where Mexico on the family side, India on the employment side, they got killed. A lot of them are going to give up, I'm sure.
That sounds like somebody going, we have too many people coming in on these from India. We're just going to not even allow them to come in anymore. Like that sounds like a political move.
I don't know what happened, but and there's some very talented people that we're gonna lose to other countries because they've got abilities to go. Those types of people with those advanced degrees have options all over the world. We talked about, before, whether it was this or other conversations about, immigrating to other countries and the motivation to do that. And for, our poor working class, that might not be an option. For our higher end, intelligent, highly educated people, they've got options. Australia will take them in a minute.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So. Well, it sounds like he just got in under
hopefully your friend did.
He moved here probably about May, so he was just ahead of that.
So he might be still on the H-1B, but I hope he, if he was working towards that permanent application, he may be in trouble in the future. I don't know.
Wow. That's shocking.
Again, if you're only allowing 65,000 visas a year, which is the common number.
Hold on a minute. Wait a minute. I should have asked that in the beginning of this because that's another mind-blowing number. How many?
Yeah, so on an employment-based side, it's approximately 65,000 visas that are available on the employment-based side.
For the whole year?
For the
whole country?
For the whole fiscal year.
65,000? That many people walk across the border in a month.
Sometimes they'll do things to increase like we have these H-2B visas that are capped. And sometimes those are temporary workers that come over for 9 or 10 months at a time. And like last year, there was so many so H-1B visa, you're Indian guy, right? Those visas, we had 500,000. I don't want to have somebody quote me on that, applications for that. And only the 60,000 so visas that are available for that. So that's how many companies wanted employees, because the companies have to sponsor that. It's not somebody from India just saying, I want to come to the United States.
This is people who are saying, I found somebody I want to hire.
500,000 people.
They had to go through that
being solicited.
And they had to go through that process to say, look, we've tried to hire local. They had to prove it.
It goes into a lottery. That's how it's been for the last several years. And we're not even going and saying, hey, this guy deserves it the most because he's the most educated and is going to contribute the most to U.S. society. It's literally throwing it into a lottery. We pick out numbers. And if you were one of those lucky 65,000 of the 500,000 applicants, you get to apply this year. If not, you got to apply again next year.
Wow.
So there's companies that hire me that we don't win the lottery. And so we don't get it that fiscal year. We've got to wait for and another nuance is that fiscal year doesn't actually start until the next year. So you're 2 years away already, and then you don't win the lottery. Then you've decentivized the companies from wanting to do the legal process because of the nuances of all this.
And I'm
going
to ask this question, anybody watching, would you rather have, because like I said, when you're talking about people just walking across the border, asylum seekers, we're talking probably now over 1 million people in the last couple of years.
Probably.
Would you rather increase that number, or would you rather increase the 65,000 people who are coming here, who already have a job, who've already being sponsored by a company? I would much rather see that number tripled.
And are vetted, and they have a job offer or have family that can support them here in the United States. And that's another rule is
that number is just ridiculously low. 65,000 people a year?
It's crazy.
What is that a month? Like
it makes no sense.
That's so silly.
Yeah.
That's silly.
And then you, even on the family-based side of the argument of, hey, they're going to be a drain on the system.
What's the cap on the family side?
Yeah,
you remember?
I'd have to look on it, but it's not a lot. I mean, that category doesn't move very often. So
wow.
So if we're 30 years back, we know it's not very much. I can't remember exactly. It might even be the same number. But then the other argument is that when you bring the people here legally, let's say it's not on the employment-based side, it's on the family-based side, they have to have an affidavit of support, which means they have to have somebody that's been vetted that is the government can sue if they do not support that person here in the United States. So they're not even eligible for the benefits for at least 5 years, if it be it access, be it welfare, whatever it is, because they've had somebody sign a contract that they will support them. So we've done a good job of setting procedures in place so we don't have these arguments of drains on social systems or whatever else. We just haven't given enough visas. We haven't given enough numerical openings for people to do it the right way.
Yeah, it's just way like that. Those seem like 1950s numbers. Like
they're and they haven't changed. That
is mind blowing.
They change very little.
In your opinion, what would be the quick fix to the immigration system that would reduce the number of illegal, de-incentivize people to do it illegally?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of proposals, but let's just stick with that one. I think that numerical limitations that were set decades ago, caps that don't reflect the population right now, don't reflect the economic need for immigrant labor. We talked about, previously, whether this conversation or others, about how many companies come into my office and are looking for any type of labor. I mean, they're coming to me because they want foreign labor because they've run out of options of domestic labor. Like nobody wants that job. And so we have this huge need. I mean, that makes news. And whether people listen to it or not, there are companies. And I've got bosses that come in that are very anti-immigration, but they still come in and go, I need help. I just don't have it. And so, increasing on the employment-based side, on the family-based side, you're gonna create one of two things. There are people here illegally just waiting for their visas. So those people will come out of the shadows and have to register, because when you get an immigrant visa, you're getting background checked. You are going to be required to pay taxes because now the government knows who you are.
Right.
And so I think that's a big advantage security related, or as far as national security goes. I think that helps us in a totally unrelated issue. But you're going to bring those people out, and then you're going to somewhat curb. We have to do some things to fix the asylum-based system and the open border type of system. We can broach that topic or not, but I think that's a total different issue, and that is causing some problems, and that's causing an influx in immigration, and that's going to be hard to get rid of in the future. There's some problems there.
Okay.
But as far as the legal immigration, people either waiting for their visas or people who are here that are not leaving, have been here for decades because they had to join their family, you're going to bring those people out of the shadows. You're going to know who they are. You're going to be able to keep track of them. If they commit crimes, you're going to have the motivation to deport them. And they know those consequences. They sign documents saying, if I commit certain felonies, I lose my green card.
Yeah.
And so I think you bring people out, and the arguments of a drain on the social system and the education system, which I think there's different nuances to even that argument, but you eliminate that. There's no argument there because they're kept track of. So you know who they are. And then, the backlogs of some of those systems we may be able to open it up to more people that come that are highly educated and have, eliminate that motivation to cross the border illegally.
So when we're talking about different types of immigration, let's talk about DACA, because that was in the news recently. And explain to us what's happened and what DACA is and what you think, is going to happen here in the future.
So DACA is an acronym. It stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it means exactly that. Deferred action means they're not going to deport you. It doesn't mean they give you legal status here in the United States. So these are not green card holders, but they just said, we'll protect you from, we're not going to look for you guys, but we're going to give you some documents that allow you to work, get a driver's license. There's been different arguments in different states, whether they get in-state tuition, the driver's license issues, because the state ends up mixing themselves up in that federal, argument. So different states are treating DACA differently. But in general, what's happening is these are kids that arrived here, and this law came out in 2012, and they had to be under 16 in the year 2012. They had to prove that they were here since 2007, so a period of 5 years. So that 10 years old when they arrived or whatever it was. And then they had to have no felonies or significant misdemeanors. Traffic tickets were okay, but that was about it. And then they had to have graduated high school at the very least, or at least gotten a GED. And then college graduates and whatever else also, qualify for that, obviously. So then they gave that protection to people. It was fine. It passed. I mean, it passed kind of under the radar a little bit. And then states started suing because it was a hotbed issue. You had a lot of border states or a lot of, right-wing leading states that didn't support that program. I don't know that they got into the nuances of the program. I really haven't heard any logical arguments on the nuances of the program. The real big argument was this was done by the president of the United States, and he didn't have the power to do it. It was when we were in a big fight of executive powers, and both presidents that we've had recently, both President Obama and President Trump, probably used executive power more than any other presidents have, at least in the recent times. Okay. So that was the big issue was, hey, this is executive power. You didn't have the power to do that. This is a Congress issue, immigration. The executive branch argues that the president had this power, that immigration is under the executive branch, which in certain respects it is. It's gone through the litigation. It's gone through the courts. The bullet point this week was this has been in litigation for years. I mean, it's been since 2012. It's really been in litigation since then. What happened is that the judge in Texas in the Fifth Circuit has declared it unconstitutional a few times. He has then sent it back to the district court. It's gone up to the Supreme Court. They've refused to take the issue. It went back to the circuit court, and once again he declared it unconstitutional. He asked the government to go through a procedure, Administrative Procedures Act, and some public commentary that he wanted them to go through, and that was part of his argument as to why it was unconstitutional. It didn't go through certain channels. They went back and did that. It passed out fine. But this week he still ruled that it was unconstitutional. He said it harmed the states in some way. I tried to read the bullet points of it. I didn't see where the major harm was. And that's the argument on the other side, is that where is the state proved their harm on these children being allowed to be here in the United States. But what it did was it allowed it disallowed any new applications to come in. So anybody that would have qualified in the last 10 years, if they didn't do it during the initial period, 2012 to 2014, or actually I think it lasted 5 years, maybe till 2017 was when it was first ruled unconstitutional. If you didn't get in that window, you can't apply.
Oh, wow.
And there's fear out there that it's ultimately, if the Supreme Court takes up the issue, it may be pulled back altogether, and then you're going to leave hundreds of thousands of people, if not a million people, you're going to lead them back into the shadows because they're not going to be able to pay taxes. They're not going to be able to legally work. And these are people that have been working for 10 years legally. I have a couple DACA employees that I love, and they're great, and they're amazing employees. And I would be really sad if I ended up having to lose them because it goes away. So I hope that doesn't happen.
But you made a very good point there, which is, they're here they're paying taxes. And that's also one of the big arguments about having, people here illegally is they're not paying taxes. They're taking advantage. This is the biggest argument you hear. They're taking advantage of tax-based systems, and they're not paying into taxes. So we as citizens are paying for benefits that the non-citizens are getting, and they're not even contributing. And I'm like, well, that's making a strong case to make them legal and to attract them. So if you took away DACA, all of a sudden you have all these people who, as you said, have been to college, they're working jobs, and now all of a sudden they're like, well, I'm not going back to Guatemala where I've never been. Maybe I was born there and I was brought here when I was 2 or 7 or whatever. I'm just going to stay here and work, and I'm going to try and get a job and be under the table. And now I got to stop paying taxes. And I'm probably not going to be able to make as much money. So now I'm going to have to rely on some sort of government assistance, or, maybe it's state or local, whatever, because, that varies. And I'm like, how does that make it better? It makes it worse, right? But, being purely trying to take the hard line saying, well, we shouldn't reward people for doing something illegal. If you're an adult and you're in a car and you people in your car, they go in and rob a bank and come out, and you drive away and you get pulled over, you're going to be charged as an accessory. Maybe you were driving the car, maybe you were a passenger, but you got to prove that you weren't an accessory to that crime. However, if it's an infant in a child car seat and your mom goes in and robs the bank, the child isn't even being considered because it's ridiculous. Why is that same logic not applied to immigration?
No, and that's a very good point. I always use hey, it's an aggravated DUI if you have a child in the car, but are you charging that child with DUI? You're not, and nobody would say that you would, so you use the robbing of the bank argument. But I've had a similar argument. Yeah, I mean, that's what we have to understand about DACA. And if I didn't do a good enough job explaining that, these are kids that arrived here they didn't sneak themselves across the border, and they didn't have the ability. I have clients that literally came here as infants, like 3-month-olds, and have never, like you said, they don't speak the language. They've never even back because they can't go back. It's not like because you have DACA, you have this free pass to go visit your home country and come back and forth. Right. You're just protected from not being deported. And so you're stuck here no matter what. So the only life you have is here. And so logically, I think, no matter where you stand on the political side, I don't know where you could come up with an argument that says, let's punish somebody that didn't commit the crime. And you say, okay, you're punishing the parents, but I don't know that as a United States society, we've ever had that type of position. Let's punish a parent or let's punish a child for something the parent did. Right. I mean, we gave 2 examples. We don't do that in the criminal justice system. Right. I don't think anybody would feel that was fair. If they changed places with this person that says, okay, I had zero choice in the matter as to why I'm here, but I'm kicking butt. I'm graduated high school. I've got an awesome job. I'm not leaving because I have zero motivation to leave because, like you said, I don't speak the language. I don't live in the culture. Right. I've been basically assimilated and raised in the United States. Most of these kids consider themselves American citizens, whether they are or not. And actually, they're the biggest political force right now trying to get themselves legal because they feel American. They feel part of the United States. Right. And so they're the most well-funded. And actually, they are the most... If there is a bipartisan issue, most of it comes out on that end of helping the dreamers. But even that we can't get done. 2012 is when this program came out, and Congress has had 11 years to figure out how to do this. And they create these bills, and sometimes they have bipartisan support. But then just as politics is, somebody wants to sneak in a border wall in there, and then somebody wants to sneak in an asylum claim or some kind of open border claim. And then, with politics in the last few years, we've got zero meeting in the middle and somebody sneaking something in, and then it just falls.
One of the challenges that I see, just as a citizen, some of the discussion that I have with people, because I've talked to people who are very like, we should just let anybody come here who wants to. And I'm like, well, obviously you haven't given this 5 minutes of thought because do you enjoy the American way of life? Unfortunately, to protect the American way of life, we have to control immigration. I've been to countries where there's, 1 billion plus people, and the level of poverty in those countries is mind blowing.
Sure.
And anyone who's from a country like India or even China or some of these countries where the population is, China maybe not even as bad because it's a bigger geographically, but even India, the numbers of people in that country, as my friend from India told me when I first went over there, I was like, he's like, our country is so big that we round off the population of the United States. It's like 1.4 billion people or somewhere around there. And we're the 0.3, whatever, that we round off. And he's like, our upper class is bigger than your entire country's population. And so when you start thinking about those numbers and how that would, if we had 1 billion people immigrate to our population reach those numbers, a lot of the same people who are arguing for that are you're talking about the economic impact, the ecological impact, the environmental impact, all these things. But let's just set all that aside and say, just going on to the basic issue, which is how do you have an immigration policy that takes care of DACA kids but doesn't incentivize illegal immigration? Because I'm going to be honest with you, if I'm a parent, I don't care what law the U.S. has. If I know I have a chance to get into the country, stay there undetected long enough with my kids so that they qualify for a program like DACA, I'm taking that risk. And I'll be like, you know what? If I get deported, I'm going to leave them in the country with grandma or with the neighbor or whatever. I can't think of a way to do that. I mean, as long as you have a program like DACA, you can always make the argument that it incentivizes illegal immigration because they get that sort of protected status.
So I would argue yes and no. So when we create programs that people can take advantage of, there is that argument that you've incentivized illegal activity. I think that the issue with DACA that's a little bit different is you haven't incentivized a community to come here because you had to have been here for a period of time in order to qualify for that. So you weren't incentivizing more people to come here. You were just bringing people out of the shadows that had already been here. And your argument was these were people that had no choice to doing it. So I would say that DACA's, I wouldn't put that in that category to incentivize people to come here. The open border that's happening right now with the asylum issues and basically, you know, we had a system that President Trump created to basically filter these people out in their home countries, be it Mexico, and we had an agreement with Mexico to keep them over the border. We did some weird stuff on that, and that caused some humanitarian arguments that wasn't necessarily the right way to do it. There was some other ways probably to do it, but then we don't take baby steps in this country. We don't figure it out. And so instead of, you know, trying to tweak it a little bit, we go the opposite end and say, okay, we're taking that policy all the way away. And not only are we taking that policy away, but our filtering system is just going to be basically, we'll check you kind of, you know, security related issues, and then we're going to release you into these communities. And, you know, we've heard of buses and that's reality. Honestly, the buses are being taken to New York, California, Arizona, dropped up on the streets. That's the reality of it. And I completely am against that. I don't think then we've motivated people, we've incentivized people to come here illegally because the consequences isn't before it was detention, have your immigration case heard before a judge, and that judge decide whether it was valid or not. And then maybe you were released if you had a real valid claim. And we've always had a country that's accepted refugees like, you know, Afghanistan, Ukraine, these war-torn countries, in El Salvador and Honduras. We had some issues back in the day. And even Mexico, if you've got a real bad case with whatever's going on in your community, we've always protected people. So there's a valid reason to have an asylum-based, and lots of countries have asylum. We're not the only ones. Europe,
right? Yeah,
Europe's got their own challenges right now with Ukraine and whatever else. So I don't think we'd ever step away from granting people some kind of refuge. But the way we've done it right now, and basically saying, here's your incentive, come talk to us for 30 minutes and come into the community, that's wrong. There's very liberal immigration attorneys. And if you're listening to this and you think that that's me, I'm not, unfortunately. I lean conservative. I would say I lean moderately conservative, just in my political views. The border's a problem.
Yeah.
As much as I love some of my asylee and refugee cases, that's the most limited part of my practice. It's not that I don't like asylum claims, but I'm very picky on ones that I take because I want it to be a very valid claim. And so while everybody has dangers and problems in their home country, that's not the way the asylum process is set up. So these people are eventually going to have a hearing, and they're most likely going to lose their hearing, especially this influx from Central America and Mexico, where there's not really war going on. There's not civil wars. There's not really political strife. It's dangerous. It's poverty stricken. They're going to eventually catch up with them if we can find them.
Right.
And they get in court. They'll eventually most likely lose their cases and they'll be put back. But then, like I don't know if this or another conversation, we talked about the backlog on immigration court. Yeah, that's going to go up.
That's what so let me ask you a couple questions on the asylum thing, because I do feel like that is when you get outside of politicians and you get outside of the rhetoric and you just talk to the average citizen, no matter how they lean left, right, whatever, and you really start understanding asylum, and you say, well, yeah, people will walk across the border and go, hey, Border Patrol, I'm over here. I'm claiming asylum, because they know that even if they don't have a valid claim, that they're going to be able to come into the country, maybe work, get a job, send some money home, save it up. And they're like, I could be here for 10 years before I even get a case. And that's way easier than just sneaking in and not raising my hand to say I'm an asylum seeker, because I'm trying to think like an immigrant. That's how I would do it. If with this current policy, I would be like, hey, why would I go through a port of entry and risk being turned away? I'm going to get into the country, flag down Border Patrol, get a ride to New York, and hope that it takes 10 years for my case to be heard. And by then, I'll have made a lot of money, sent it home. Maybe I won't even want to stay here. And if I do, then I'll just say, okay, well, I'm not showing up to court, and I'll just go to illegal status at that point.
And I'm not going to hide from you being correct in that assumption. In fact, every day I'm trying to convince people that I'm doing it for legally. I'm doing a legal process for them. But because of our backlogs that we've talked about and our wait time, where they've got people pushing them in their communities going, hey, I sent my brother up and he claimed for asylum. And perception's not always reality. These people think, oh, I got here legally. I've got a work permit and I was led across the border. So it was a legal entry, and their perceptions are a little bit, because we've made it that way. We've incentivized them to do that.
I mean, technically aren't they here legally?
Kind of, not really. They don't have lawful presence, but they were let into the country. So we have some technical legal terms like unlawful presence and lawful presence and unlawful status and lawful status. And no, they don't have any of those things, but they were let into the country. So whether we, technically call that legally or not, it's not under the law. It's not, but they've been let in.
And are they required to pay taxes if they work? Are they allowed to work?
So sure, if there was a work authorization given, then it's easier to figure out how to W-2 them and take payroll taxes. And tax is a totally different issue too, because a lot of these people are paying taxes with payroll taxes and never getting a tax benefit. So while that argument of they don't pay taxes, it's not technically true unless the company doesn't want to expense them. And I'm sure there are companies that are paying, maybe their landscaper under the table, they're giving them $500 in cash, but that's a detriment to the company too. They don't like to do that because they can't expense that employee off their taxes. Right. And so usually they're W-2ing them or 1099ing them because that's the way to get around that. And then the payroll taxes are taken out no matter what. But the immigrant never sees that benefit because they can't file for a return. So they're paying into the system a little bit. So that's a totally different topic that we talked about, that argument of they're not paying taxes. Actually, a lot of them are, and they're never getting the benefits for it. And some of the social systems, like you said, hey, they're taking advantage of the social system. Education's free here in the United States. You don't have to prove your immigration status. So that one's a good, valid argument. Okay. The healthcare argument, like access and whatever else, you can't qualify for that if you don't prove you're a green card holder or a citizen. So they're not draining that system.
How does that keep coming up then?
I don't know. Honestly, and maybe different states have different rules, but I can only speak to Arizona. You can't apply for that status if you don't have legal status in the United States.
Well, I would even argue that there are certain hospitals, and I think it's either their policy or maybe it is regulated in the state, where they have to treat anybody who walks in. And
so I know where you're going with this. Okay. Let me give you a counter argument to that. And again, I'm not super liberal on immigration policy, but I just understand the nuances of it.
That's what I wanted. That's why you're here. Yeah, explain it.
So yes, because we don't offer insurance programs here, even private insurance, the private insurance won't take clients that don't have a green card or a social security number. So they can't get insurance.
Okay.
So again, it's this whole thing of what have we motivated them to do? The only people that will take them, that they know they will get treatment no matter what if they have an emergency, is the emergency room, because you're right, the hospitals have these policies to treat anyone. So they have to go there, and you're right, they probably leave bills there. Some of them are responsible and they'll pay it, but sometimes it's a $20,000 bill and it's going to take them 10 years to do it. They just don't have the money,
right?
Because they're not insured. And so we've given them no options to get insurance because they have to stay under the radar. And yet they're going to need care if they're here sometimes. And so because they can't get insurance, they're going to have these huge bills that nobody else has. We don't have those bills because we get insurance, whether it's supplemented from the government. And I'm not saying the government should supplement them, but I do think there should be at least an option for them to self-insure. Yeah. And then it's not going to eliminate the whole problem, but there's nuances to all of that if you can't get a benefit at all, then of course it's going to be a drain on some system because somebody's going to help you along the way. And there are, humanitarian arguments from those hospitals and they probably get drained. I totally agree with that one.
But in my own conversations with people who are here illegally, Most of them won't go to the doctor because they're afraid they're going to get turned in. It's going to create a paper trail.
I don't know how many people ask me, hey, I've got a debt in the hospital. I want to pay it. I'm trying to pay it down. Is it going to cause me not to be able to get a green card?
Right.
And no is the answer to that.
Okay.
Our civil debts don't cause us issues on that. But yeah, I mean, there's people that it's the same thing about reporting crimes. Depending on what the time, the climate is that we're living, the Sheriff Joe days, he was literally detaining people that reported crimes. He was knocking on the door looking for people and then asking the people that answered the door that had nothing to do with the crime if they had papers, and he was taking them. And so we created this massive fear in the community.
Yeah. That was the intent though, right?
And maybe
to deter people from wanting to stay in Arizona.
But but it wasn't doing that.
It didn't.
Yeah. What it did was drive people more into the shadows.
Yeah.
And then you are causing national security concerns because you're not being able to keep track of them. And then they band together as communities and hide each other, and you get sanctuary cities and whatever else. But you kind of push them to do that when you're. My opinion is we bring them out of the shadows. If they're not leaving, that's the reality of it. If you really think that you're going to have this mass deportation and just kick everybody out of the country, and we're talking about millions upon millions of people, finding them, number one, the resources that it would take to just bust into these communities, and it would have to be done in almost like back in the military type of days where we take over communities and look into house, and we've got all kinds of rights that would violate, and it's just. We just don't have the process to do that, to do a mass gathering of people. And so it's just not realistic. We're not going to get rid of all these people. And so my argument is if they qualify, if they don't have crimes and whatever else, let's create systems, legal systems, whether that be increasing caps that are already existing or creating a new system where, DACA becomes a permanent system, and we can start to legalize these people and give them more motivation to be more assimilated to our community. Because they feel a part of it already. They want to be a part of it, but they have no options of doing it.
It's almost like politicians and people who make a stink about it have just resigned themselves to say, this is as good as it gets, but we're just going to keep using it as a talking point.
Oh, and then we've made no progress. Every election cycle has immigration as their hotbed issue, whether it's going to be, on President Biden, we're going to create all these programs to legalize people, and, we've done the border thing. I guess he did that because he did it under an administrative policy. But as far as getting Congress to agree to anything, whether DACA was going to be legalized and it was going to be permanent, and President Trump was going to deport everyone and build a wall and curb immigration. And while there was inlays to that, there was some progress to that, we had zero solutions as far as what Congress got involved in and those are the people that really make the decisions. That's where we get policy and where we get law. And there's been no progress since President Bush. That's the last real major immigration reform, if you don't count DACA, which isn't a permanent program, that we've had. And so I think the big issue is like I said, I don't lean on the liberal side. I'm not super Tea Party right wing. While I'm conservative, I think I'm also a realist.
Right.
We just have a broken system, and you described it as black and white, but it's not.
That's how people see it.
That's how people see it. No, how your opinion is it, but people see as it's either mass deportations and get everybody out of here or let everybody in. Neither one of those is the reality, and neither one of those survive. We don't survive without immigrant labor, and so we can't necessarily close everything off. Our population is growing, whether there's immigrants are here or not, and we rely on that labor. And our capitalistic society has succeeded on the backs of immigrant labor, whether we like to admit it or not. And we're going to need that support. And I see that every day from businesses that need the support to keep their businesses running. We've also got people that are here that need to come out of the shadows and be accounted for, and we need to be able to keep track of them and make sure our national security is okay. But there is absolutely an argument on let's make sure we're checking people that come into the United States. And so this open border thing is a major issue. And I don't support what's going on that side of things. And there is a broken system there. But it's nobody seems to be able to, and I don't think while it's nuanced, it's not that complicated. But unfortunately, putting politics back in and not taking it out, we don't have a political system right now that compromises. We don't have a lot of middle thinking people. And even if we have middle thinking people, they're controlled by people that won't let them compromise, whether it be their constituency or whether it be people in their party, because the bullet points make news. and that's the things that will not get anything done if we don't start to come to the table. So, I mean, our last immigration reform was the two major immigration reforms from President Bush and President Reagan, both Republican leaning.
That's the thing. And when I think about it, I'm like, going back to the incentivization of it, because I think that's where, when I talk to the average citizen, that's where it gets hung up, is the incentivization of illegal immigration. And I'm like, you're never going to take away the incentive because America's awesome.
We have a great country.
As long as America's awesome, it doesn't matter how big you build the wall. It doesn't matter how many laws you pass. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. People are going to take risks for something awesome. So the only way we disincentivize people is to become a crap country. And so I think, going to your point of realism, we just have to realize that this is the cost of being amazing. You're going to have people who want to be part of this amazing thing, and we just have to figure out the best way to manage it. So
and manage, it's a good word, because I don't think we're coming up with a permanent solution, because our country changes and the population changes and the motivations change and the world changes. And so that motivation comes from maybe different parts of the world to get here in the United States. And lucky for us, we're such a blessed country that people want to be us. They want to come here. And so you're right. I don't think we ever, unless we are, I have my own opinions of where we're headed as a country. We're great though. I love being an American. I love living here. And I understand why people want to come here. We have to be realistic that there might be solutions that last for 25 years, and that'll be great. We take care of a big chunk. We did that in the 80s. Nobody's mentioned anything about how amnesty in 1986, which President Reagan put in, destroyed our country. I haven't heard that argument at all. Now, they'll say amnesty is this bullet point word that nobody likes.
Right.
But that was an amnesty program, and I hear very few people complain about all the 86 immigrants that came here and ruined our country.
Right.
And really, that didn't happen.
No, the only argument I've ever heard is you give amnesty to somebody that then they became a criminal, and I'm like, well, that happens just with citizens. So it's not a strong argument.
Is that
you shouldn't give amnesty to somebody who's like, up for a felony or something.
Well, number one, you can't.
You can't.
There's protections in place for these programs, and they'll be background checked and they'll be fingerprinted. And then if they commit a crime, guess what? You can find them because they're not using somebody else's name.
Right.
They're not hiding in the shadows.
Right.
They're not going to these sanctuary cities to be hidden because they're working and they're in your communities. And then, if you have to get rid of them because they're a bad person, now, whether they come back or forth, and that's a different thing. Those people aren't coming back legally no matter what. If they've been deported, there's no options for them. And so, we've got to have Border Patrol. We've still got to have, people looking for those types of people. But in a general sense, if you're having some kind of program, and I'm not an advocate for amnesty necessarily, but just using that as an example, in the 80s, we can keep track of those people now.
Yeah.
And if they committed crimes, they're gone. If they didn't, they're contributing members of the society that are probably 70 years old now and have been working their whole lives. Most of them are probably citizens and waiting for their kids, the 30 years that they had to wait for them. And maybe some of them are ready to be immigrated.
So that brings me to my question for you. What if we had a program that was like, hey, look, because I think we kind of do this with Cuba. I don't even understand how that dynamic works with Cuba, but it was sort of like, hey, we're going to try and stop you from coming here, but if you make it to land,
the dry foot law.
And I'm like, couldn't we come up with something similar to that for people that are trying to get here? Now, maybe they'll fly here, maybe they'll cross the border illegally through a port of entry, and they'll make some sort of claim. I would say you'd have to really restrict asylum seekers. My opinion on asylum is, it's a great program. You just shouldn't be able to step foot in the country until they validated your claim.
Yeah, in defense of, and I don't defend this policy very often, but in defense of the asylum program and how they've set it up, the problem with what you're saying as far as vetting them before they get here, which is I fully support, you have to have third party cooperation, meaning you have to have a third country because they're leaving their country. If they truly have an asylum claim, they can't stay there. And so if they're being, persecuted by their home country, they're going to have to get out of there. So you need some third party cooperation. And in our case, being a border state in Arizona, it's most likely Mexico. So there was an agreement with Mexico that they were going to keep them there and they were going to be vetted from Mexico. I didn't study enough to know. I mean, there was human rights concerns all over the place because we had people just sleeping on the bridges for months right outside of El Paso or outside of Tijuana. I'm confused. I don't know the answer to why, even in President Trump's administration, which was kind of on the anti-immigration side, why there was an influx of so many people that wanted to come and apply for asylum, because he wasn't incentivizing people to do that. There weren't a lot of Mexicans, honestly. There were a lot of Central Americans, because there was some kind of rumor going on in their country that we were doing asylum differently. And there were a lot of Venezuelans that got into Mexico and were coming up, but they were just sleeping at the border, and it caused problems even in the border, because then you had, the narcos targeting those people to say, hey, if you don't want to sleep here for the next 6 months, carry my bag of marijuana across the border and whatever else. It caused its own concerns. I don't know what the solution is, but you definitely have to have third party, help for that, because they're coming to the border no matter what. Some of them, there are programs in like when you're coming into refugee camps, if you're really like you've been released from Ukraine and Poland takes you in and you want to get to the United States, you can be in a refugee camp for 5 or 6 years and they vet you there. And there's programs that UNHCR, if I'm getting my acronym mixed up, but United Nations basically helps place them here in the United States.
I think you said it best. It's not fixing, it's managing it. How do you manage it? And
I just don't think there's a fix,
a
permanent fix.
Right.
I think there's solutions to make it better.
I saw your story that you made about the gentleman who was on your YouTube channel.
Okay.
There was one particular piece of that story where you were talking about the paperwork or whatever, basically sitting on somebody's desk for like a long time, and how frustrating that was, and how sort of the steps you had to go through. And
yeah, this was a guy that was married to a U.S. citizen. We went through the process, like we talked before, of doing a petition, waiting the years that it took out to do that petition. He'd actually been with 2 other immigration attorneys. They had done it, and it was denied both times. And he was frustrated. In fact, he didn't do anything for about 6 years. And his wife came into my office and said, hey, will you look at this case and see what you can do with it? And I go, oh, I'm not sure. I think there's a solution to this case. It's a little nuanced, but I think we can push this through. So we filed it. We had the interview. And in the interview, there was more paperwork that was needed. And I knew what the paperwork was. It was a waiver that we've talked about, these big phone books full of evidence on hardship to the wife. So I turned that waiver in. No, it was already prepared. I knew exactly what I was getting into. And that's where the other immigration attorneys had failed, is they got stuck on, hey, he was denied, but didn't realize there was a solution to it. So I was fully prepared with it. I turned it in like the day after we had the interview, and then we heard nothing. I mean, it literally just needed to be, it was evidence. It needed to be read through. But in my experience, this was done in weeks, maybe a month. I have to remember my story, but I think it was years, and we ended up having to even get senators involved. They have their immigration liaisons that we can get involved to push cases along when people stop listening to us. So this was on a local area. I mean, I get caught on the national area of immigration law all the time because we have these lock boxes that we send things. Not everything's done locally. This one, after it gets filtered through the kind of national lock boxes and service centers, it ends up locally. And so I could even go into the office and I couldn't get anybody to give me an answer. Oh yeah, they're reviewing it. I don't know if my officer went on maternity leave for 9 months. I literally don't know why it took so long, but the family was in limbo without a decision for a few years. And then I got Senator Kelly's office, I believe, was the one that helped us. And they finally sent kind of a not so nice message to the office saying, let's get this going. And yeah, we got a positive decision, but luckily they were super patient with me, but they were super happy too, because they had tried for a long time and hadn't been able to do it. So it's cool that story, if anybody checks out our whatever, I don't know where it's at on our website or look me up, YouTube channel if we've got one.
You had at least that video.
So excellent. I think there's a few other ones that we've done, these little mini documentaries, but the coolest part was he hadn't been to Mexico for 30 years. And his mom, we have some footage at the end, his mom's in a wheelchair and hadn't seen him for decades.
Yeah.
And it was because he couldn't go back. He was stuck. He didn't want to leave his U.S. citizen children. He had 5 kids and they'd never met their grandparents. They'd never met their grandma. I think his dad had passed away, but his mom was like in her 90s. And we have footage of him coming to the airport and they have these big signs. And it was such a cool, heartwarming story to see him, hug and cry with his mom. His wife's a teacher and they're very, very well set up in the community, but he had to hide in the shadows because he couldn't figure it out.
So the thing that's unacceptable to me as a citizen, and I think this is a middle ground with everybody, is there shouldn't be these insane delays. It should be as easy as getting your driver's license. And I would be willing as a taxpayer, as opposed to hiring 80,000 IRS agents, to hire 80,000 more people to work in immigration to eliminate that, because I think number one, it makes the asylum issue almost go away. If you're like, yeah, you can apply today and we'll have an answer to you by next week, especially if you do it right and you do it with an attorney, and you can just, if you eliminated that alone, I think it would make managing it easier. What's your opinion on that? This is coming from somebody who's like naive on a lot of things. Sure. Would that actually make a difference?
Yeah. So they may have arguments of, hey, there's some security background checks, but with technology today, I watch people go into my interviews and run their fingerprints and it automatically pops up with any criminal history that they have and whatever else. So I don't think that's a valid argument, because I think our technology is caught up. That might have been a valid argument before. So I don't know if that's one of their, I really probably would tell you that I like a lot of the immigration officers. They're great people. And they would probably tell me it's that we don't have money to hire more people. And so I think, there's some budgetary concerns as to where we're putting our money. And apparently immigration's not one of them, is according to what they tell me. I don't know about that other than the rhetoric that's talked about. But I think there's solutions of, one of the things that I think needs to happen is on the deportation defense, or on the deportation side of things, the immigration court, the higher ups in that court, the supervising judges and whatever else, and most anybody that's dealt with immigration court believes that they need to be an independent body, but they are under the DOJ, they're under the Department of Justice. And so they answer to people that are not immigration experts. And they don't understand the system. And there's procedures in place that don't fit the immigration. These judges know, and we know, and I would advocate for the same thing. And it could be detrimental to me because it could give a judge more power that I may not like, but I feel like they need it.
Right.
They're subject to rules and procedures and timing of cases that if they became independent, which most courts are, if not all courts are, then that power is now, there's more discretion, and those cases will move along quicker. They'll be able to pick out cases that are priorities for the government, those ones that are felonies and whatever else, and get those people out quicker. And those ones that aren't, they can start to, maybe push off to the back of their docket, and that'll
mind blowing right now. Mind blowing.
And the government's tried
no idea about any of this stuff.
Yeah. So there is some programs that exist that they're trying to prioritize those that they're deporting. Yeah. But the body itself, immigration court, is not independent. And so they still get supervised, and they'll make changes that they feel like are going to make the court more efficient. And they're the ones, honestly, that know, because they're in there day to day.
Right.
And then those changes come back and go, all the time in court, I'm there. Hey, this policy existed yesterday. Not anymore. We were told from the higher ups. And these higher ups don't necessarily know. They're not in immigration court because it's under the entire Department of Justice, which has the attorney general over it, but the attorney general is not an immigration attorney. So we're now involving the executive branch again. And depending on who's in office, that can be more liberal or conservative, but it changes way too much.
Yeah.
And if the laws were just the laws, and an independent body that didn't have to answer to somebody, doesn't have to answer to the executive branch, then it becomes a more streamlined system. We know what we're getting into as immigration attorneys because the laws are the same. Like family law court or criminal court, those statutes have been on the books for a long time. It's very rare that a new statute comes out. Marijuana is a hotbed issue that changed a little bit. But apart from that, if you committed, a DUI, the DUI law has been the same for the last several decades. And so as an attorney that you're dealing with, hey, this person violated this areas of the statute. In immigration law, it's not like that. We get changes all the time. We get policy changes. We get memos that come out that say, you can do this. The next day we can't. I've walked into court several times where the judges went, hey, we agreed to this, but guess what? I was told yesterday that I can't do this anymore.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to pause you there for a minute because my mind is blowing right now. And I'm hoping that people watching this are comprehending what you're saying. So I'm going to slow it down and make sure I am.
Okay.
So you mentioned family law court. I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand how courts work. Like I said, in my mind, there's one court. It's the court. And just different attorneys show up to the court. how does family law not exist under the Department of Justice in the same way that immigration does?
Yeah, because number one, family laws, we're federal, so I don't want to mix the two up. There is the difference between, because immigration law is a federal law, not not a state law. So the state law, the state courts don't become involved. The only time we deal with state laws is interpreting state criminal statutes with the federal statutes as to whether somebody's deportable or not. So we do mix a little bit of state law, but we're not under the state at all. We're all under the federal government. And so basically 9/11 is to blame for a lot of this, whether that be good or bad. We decided, because we weren't communicating very well in 9/11, and that's what is blamed for that attack. You know, FBI had information that CIA didn't have, and they weren't sharing. They created the Department of Homeland Security, which basically umbrellaed everybody under the federal government, so they would all talk to each other. That's great in principle, but there has been some problems that have come out of that. And one of them is an immigration court problem, because you're under this umbrella, you've got people that don't understand the immigration court, that just are on the political side of things, that are trying to control policy and trying to cater to their constituents. But you have these judges that are trained to do immigration law and interpret immigration law, that are the attorney general telling them, no, you can't interpret it in that way. For example, under President Trump's administration, the attorney general took up 4 or 5 cases on his own, meaning he just picked them from the court because he wanted to deal and decide those issues. So he took them away from the judges and said, I'm going to decide these issues. He had 0 immigration experience.
Wow.
But he was like, I want these ones because I want it to go a certain way. So I'm going to handpick these cases and I'm going to make the decision. And he became a judge out of nowhere. He was the attorney general. He was not a judge. But because it was under that umbrella, he was able to handpick those cases and decide for the courts. And then that precedent went down. And that was amazing to me. I'm going, you have taken the independence away from these. Like, what are the judges there for? They're appointed to be able to interpret these immigration laws, just like every other court is appointed to interpret our laws. We had people on the executive side of things, and that's where immigration becomes so nuanced. And so you got to stay on top of it, because that's happening. Things are happening on the bureaucratic side of things that are different than any other court. And so because they're not independent, they got their power stripped from them, and they get it still stripped from them all the time. And the judges get, I mean, you can read blogs from immigration judges all over the place saying, I have no power, honestly. I do, but I don't. Like, I don't make my own decisions. It's set by policy.
So,
and it's set by numerical limits still. So, for example, let me give you another example. A lot of the defenses that we use in immigration court for deportation defenses are based on these hardship. And usually it's a very hard case to win, extreme and unusual hardship. So we have to prove, usually the cases I win on these deportation defenses are people that obviously don't have felonies and major crimes, but they have kids who have Down syndrome, or their U.S. citizen parents have cancer, or, I mean, it has to be major.
Wow. But
there's a numerical limitation once again to those. And so if you have 3 kids with Down syndrome, you may win your case, but there's only 3,500, 4,000 of these cases that can win a year nationwide. So then you're in a backlog for 3-4 years before you get your green card. So you've won it, but again, you're sitting there waiting for the actual benefit to come.
And you're saying those numbers were set decades ago?
Yep. These are limited, just like everything. Like even on the court side of things, we have numerical limitations.
So this is the reason why this is so mind-blowing to me is whenever I hear proposals on ways to improve immigration, I've never heard that before. And this is why nobody talks to lawyers, because they're going to point out something nobody wants to talk about.
Meaning
because
increasing the cap, or
increasing the cap, and then separating the court out so that they can actually function more efficiently and with expertise there. Now, the way you described a little scenario there with the attorney general, so I'm like, well, if they did that, I'm trying to think of the incentive why who the powers that be, whoever it is who would decide that. To say Department of Homeland Security or whatever it is that says, you know what, we're going to take immigration court and give them their own power structure, or set it up in the way that you described, however that is. What's their incentive for not doing it? And I'm thinking it has to be political. It has to be political power.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, right now, immigration is, like it or not, and I don't like it because it's too individualized. It's too centralized to the executive party right now. That's the motivation is that they can control it. They can control it a little bit easier than, and I think there's a misnomer about making it independent. You're not taking away the law.
No.
You're just taking away the bureaucracy.
The bureaucracy, which
of changing that law. And immigration's the only, like, I pride myself in knowing all the new updates. And like you talked about DACA earlier, that was just this week.
right.
I'm in one of the areas, I feel like I'm in the only area of law where my job can change on the daily.
Wow.
Like how I do things and how it's interpreted. I have to know every day. I can't just study. I mean, these guys that have done estate planning for 20 years, it's robotic for them. I mean, the same thing. They have the same form that they fill out. They change names and whatever else. I don't want to disparage any estate planning attorneys, and I don't mean that they don't do a good job.
Of course.
But they don't have to learn the law over and over again. And I do. I have to learn the law every day. And sometimes it's my own clients that are calling me and saying, did you see this in the news? And I go, okay, let me pause. Let me Google it.
More mind-blowing going on over here. So this is the other thing that's just blowing my mind. You always hear the argument, well, let's do it legally. But the definition of legal can change daily. So, and I don't think people understand that. Like, you hear an executive order from a president that changes something. What are other ways that those laws are getting changed? Because you threw in a layer in there with the Department of Homeland Security and the attorney generals and all that sort of stuff that the only way I thought these election laws were changing was Congress or the president. But you're telling me there's procedural or other things that are happening.
Yeah. So let's give them the most recent simple example that I can give is a program called prosecutorial discretion. Big word. So in every court system that we have, and especially in the criminal is the easiest way to compare it, the states, the prosecutors, their bosses, the judges, the defense attorneys, they can all look at a case and go, hey, let's meet on a table and let's say, hey, I don't think there's enough evidence to present this case, so I'm going to offer him this plea deal. Or, you know what? We don't have enough evidence at all, so we're going to drop the case. That's our power as a state attorney, as a county attorney. We just don't have the evidence. Or you presented something to us that says this guy doesn't deserve to be charged with this particular crime. We're going to charge him with another, whatever. There's discretion, right? For immigration law, we didn't have that for a long time. So they created it first under President Obama. And they created this discretion program that basically gave power to the attorneys and eventually even the judges, which I found awesome, to have a neutral party. Because no matter what, when we are talking about ICE attorneys, who are my opposing counsel,
right?
I have great ones. I have great relationships and great logically, realistically thinking people. And then you have personalities that are not. and no matter what I presented, I could have kids with Down syndrome, cancer, or whatever else that were going to absolutely be murdered if they got back to Mexico or not being able to provide it for, that they just wouldn't move on. It was just their personal policy, discretion, whatever. But that's fine. But I loved that they gave it to the judges because the judges became neutral bodies that didn't have a dog in the fight. And then they would say, hey, even if you don't want to, this is not a priority for me. Like this guy's.
It just seems like common sense to have a judge have that power.
And that was that independent body. So we gave that to them, but it was an executive order, prosecutorial discretion. So we had that given to the judges and to the ICE attorneys. And I found that was the best program that I've had because we had realistic expectations. We were able to negotiate. We were able to prioritize criminals and whatever else. My losing cases lost, my winning cases won, and they were done in a timely manner, or they didn't even get to the court and we didn't backlog it. We started to catch up to the system when we had that. President Trump came along, Attorney General for him, took away that program completely. In fact, put in limitations that said we have no discretion, and we took it away from the judges. And so you can't close a case even if you want to, even if a person is doing another process. So for example, I was always able to close a case if somebody got married to or was married to a U.S. citizen and they had a legal pathway to do green cards outside of the court, so they didn't backlog the court. The judges would say, hey, I'm going to administratively close this, meaning I'm not going to bring you back to court. I'm going to let you play this process out. We'll keep track of you. If you don't get it done, we'll bring you back in. But I know it's going to take 6, 8, 10 years. Let's figure that out because you have I don't want to waste my time with this. If I deport you, you're coming back. You have a U.S. citizen wife. So I'm going to prioritize this. You're not a felon. Here's your chance to do that. And they would let them do it. That power existed with the judges. Then President Trump took that away. There was no discretion. So everyone was deportable. So again, we motivated and incentivized these people to come back because some of them had spouses and some of them had, these cases pending, but we gave them no opportunity to finish them. So we just wanted everybody out. But more than anything, it took away the power from the judges to prioritize these cases. So our backlog went back up.
Wow.
We were deporting everybody. And so because we couldn't close any cases out, even the ones that had solutions other ways where we could eliminate that backlog, we took it that away. Now we brought it back in, but we brought it back in forcefully. So now there's a ton of discretion from the prosecutors, none for the judges. They still haven't given it back to the judges. And this is again my argument with making the EOIR an independent body so that those judges can have that discretion again. But now the department, ICE, has discretion to close my cases. And they're doing that a lot. And the memo is basically, if they're not a threat to national security, we'll close their cases for the majority of those cases. That's fine. It will start to eliminate the backlog. But I don't think that's the solution either, because I think that they're probably a little too liberal with those cases. And I think there's arguments on that side that we shouldn't be closing 90% of the cases like that's happening right now, because we've provided no pathway otherwise for these people. So once again, they were in the system and now we're forcing them back out of the system and back into the shadows, because when they close their cases, they're not giving them work authorizations. When they're in court, they have work authorizations. They can work, they're legal, they're kept track of. The minute they close the cases and they dismiss these cases, they're giving them no work permits, no solution. I think an easy solution to that is if you're going to close them out and you've decided they're not felons and they have great cases, give them something to continue to work and some kind of path to get legal, or at least even a work authorization so they can continue to pay taxes and not live in the shadows.
Because these are people who are trying to do it legal.
Well, at least the government's aware of them.
Yeah, that's my point.
So whether they're trying to do it legally or they're just defending themselves, they've come into the system. Why are we kicking them out of the system? And I don't mean that I'd want the prosecutorial discretion to go away. I think that's a good thing.
Sure.
But why have we not, on the back end of things, why have we not provided some way to keep track of them after? I don't understand that part.
With what you just described, that's why it's so mind-blowing to me, and it's so eye-opening, because I'm starting to realize that even within what we are calling the legal system, there's these nuances that I wasn't aware of.
We still lose track of people.
That we still, and the just like common sense tells me, I don't care what your politics are, that's just common sense that's a bad idea.
Well, again, because, and I don't understand the logic to it. Why are we fighting so hard not to give them work authorization when we know they're here? We know in order to even fight this case, they had to have been here for 10 years and they had to have a U.S. citizen spouse, child, or parent. So they've got connections to the country. These are not your transitory immigrants.
Right.
These are people that have been here for a long time. They have no felonies, and they've got some kind of connection, some kind of anchor to the United States. So they're not leaving.
Yeah.
They get to work for 5 years. And during that time, you're able to check them. If they commit a crime, they're gone, right?
Yeah.
They don't win their case. They're not closed out. But then you close them and you dismiss their case and you take away that work authorization, even though you know who they are. You've fingerprinted them for the last 5 years. You've allowed them to work. And now you say, I know you're not leaving. In fact, we're going to give you the permission to be here. We're going to close your case and we're not going to deport you. But by the way, you don't have permission to be here and do anything. You can't work, which everybody's working. So now you've forced these employers to have incentive to hire the guy that they've had now employed for 5 years legally, who has become a great asset.
They're going to pay him under the table.
Pay him under the table.
Yeah.
They don't pay taxes, or they contribute to taxes, and we can't keep track of them, or whatever the situation is. Yeah, we're creating these systems to temporarily, and when I say temporarily, I mean like years instead of decades. We're talking, or months. We solve something, we keep track of them, we know where they're at. And again, I'm talking about people who are here already. Yeah. And not people, this is not bringing more people. I'm not talking about the saturation of the country.
Sure.
These people are staying here. They were given permission to stay here, but we're taking away any way to keep track of them, or for them to feel like members of the community. And then that's another argument on immigration, is that, well, these people don't assimilate to the United States. Well, we take away some of that motivation. Yeah. Because the minute that they want to contribute, and when they're paying taxes, just like when I earned my money to get my bike when I was 8 years old, I valued that bike. When they're starting to contribute to those policies, to being able to vote or whatever it is, and be involved in their community, the more likely they're going to be contributing members of the community and not separate themselves and isolate themselves into communities. Yeah. But when you send them out of court and then just say disappear again, you're creating these secret communities no matter what.
Yeah. You know this. And even I know this just from talking, speaking Spanish and talking to people and helping people with understand everything. There's a whole subculture.
Sure.
Like There's a whole very well, or arguably more organized subculture system on how to get to America, get a job, find a place to live, and live here for 30 years under the radar. Like they've figured it out. And to your point, it's like, and I think most people would agree. If somehow, we're coming back to that, well, you're incentivizing people for being here. I'm like, sorry, but
they're here.
They're here.
I get that.
That's why I go back to the Cuba thing. You know what I mean? It's like,
and I get that argument and I don't build a wall. I don't, maybe people will be mad at me for saying that in my immigration colleague community. I really don't care. Build a wall, de-incentivize people from crossing the border illegally, from saturating the country with too many people. But I just laugh at the arguments of those that have been here for decades. Like they're not leaving. They're just, unless we completely change the way we are as a people, and we then start doing things that we've seen archaically done that don't work when we start enslaving people and imprisoning people and that would include these DACA kids that had no choice whether to be here or not, or the stay-at-home moms and whatever else. We're not going to get to that point. I mean, it just doesn't work, and so we've got to figure out some way. And I think there is solutions, whether it be increasing caps and numerical limitations. There's certain penalties that exist in immigration that we haven't even talked about that disqualify for people for 10 years.
I did want
Can
you talk about that for a minute? Because that is something that I learned when I was doing research to bring you on that I didn't understand. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So, and this one's a tricky one because I think you will get arguments of, well, they broke the law and technically immigration, when you cross the border, it is not a law that you're breaking. Everybody says that you've committed a crime. There is no crime for crossing the border. We have a civil violation of immigration. Immigration is not considered a criminal violation. And so there are immigration criminal violations, but simply crossing the border is not one of them. So they can prosecute you for other things, smuggling and whatever else. But that's a kind of a technical
nuance. Wait a minute,
nuance.
hold on.
So there's no crime for, deportation is not a crime, like criminally. You can't be imprisoned for, like they can deport you on the border. It can be done in 8 hours or 2 hours and whatever else. It's not considered a crime as far as the criminal statutes go.
So hold on, let me just make sure I understand what you said.
Sorry, and I didn't mean to put us on a tangent.
No, because this is important. Because that's a major argument, right? That you're breaking the law or you're committing a crime. There's a difference between
breaking the law and committing a crime.
So you are breaking a law, but you're not a criminal, because I always hear people say,
it's administrative law. So I don't want to try and defend that. That's not what
I'm just trying to get
but there is a little bit, as a lawyer, I pick out the technicalities of those types of things. And there is some language difference between becoming a criminal by crossing the border.
Right.
And you can do that by smuggling people and smuggling drugs and lying to the government and whatever else.
Crimes.
Those are crimes that can be prosecuted.
But simply walking across the border and saying, I'm just going to live here
is breaking the immigration administrative laws. Sure.
Gotcha.
But not necessarily something you can be thrown in jail for.
Right.
There's an administrative disqualification on that.
Sure.
And that's where we were going.
Yeah.
Is that, and this is a technical term, but we're going to call it the BBAR. It's 212A9B is the statute.
Okay.
And that BBAR means that any time that you've spent in the United States illegally over a year period, or over, actually it's 180 days for, so a 6-month period, and then there's another penalty that comes after a year. Once you pass that year mark, you have a 10-year penalty, which means the government wants you outside of the United States for 10 years for doing that. So we do somewhat decentivize people from coming to the United States, but none of them are aware of this, honestly. So they marry the U.S. citizen, and then they find out. Now, this doesn't pertain to those that overstay their visas. So overstaying their visas, they get an exception to the law. So when you enter in legally and you're inspected, then you can still do things without a waiver. There's still other nuances to it, but in general. These are for people that have, like you said, crossed the border, and they get this 10-year penalty. So they want them to leave for 10 years. No, nobody's doing that. We have created some programs. President Obama created a program where we could do the waiver, which needed to be done to forgive that penalty outside of the United States before, which nobody was doing because nobody wanted to leave. He did provide the path to do that here in the United States. But that was the thing I was describing at the beginning that's taking 6 years. And that's what's driving me crazy is I was being able to get these U.S. citizen spouses that had this BBAR. I was getting these cases done in 2 to 3 years. Now I'm having to babysit these cases for 6 years, which is a detriment to my clients because I'm having to charge them more because I have to babysit a case for 6 years. So it's not making me any more money because I'm having to do this triple the work, But unfortunately, it's causing immigration attorneys to be more expensive because they've lengthened the process. So that BBAR exists. There's still a way around that, except that waiver is only based on a U.S. citizen spouse or lawful permanent resident spouse or a parent. The biggest issue we have is these child applications. So let's say somebody let's say somebody came here 30 years ago. They've had 5 children. Those children are U.S. citizens, become 21 years old. There's a category to petition your parents. It's always existed. That's a lot of my immigrants. But what happens is they have that BBAR and they cannot adjust their status. They cannot get a green card because they have no basis for their waiver. So there's a big community right here that's been here a long time that want to do it legally, that have zero pathway to it. So another change that I think could happen, because I don't think it's going to create, again, you're not saturating the country with more people. These are people that are already here.
Right.
But eliminating that BBAR, I know it's somewhat, and the argument would be you've incentivized somebody who came to the United States, but my argument back would be, we've already done that. Like, why are we trying to, kick a dead horse or whatever we're doing?
Yeah.
It's already happened. So if we eliminate that BBAR, then we've eliminated that 10 years, and they can file, they can go to the consulate, they can get their criminal stuff looked at. They'll still be denied if they have something, that's going to cause national security complaints or problems. But otherwise, again, we've now pushed another group into the shadows that have kids here and families here, and all their kids are here. And so they're not leaving. Again, this is not somebody that, hey, since you have this BBAR, now you're motivated to leave. The minute they find out about it, and I have to tell people all the time about this when they come into my office, and they go, oh, well, I guess I just go back home and work for the same company.
Now I'm screwed.
I have no solution.
Yeah.
Your motivation drops to want to assimilate. Your motivation drops to want to do things legally. So I get people coming in all the time that say, hey, bosses all the time saying, hey, I've got Johnny Z and he's my best employee. I 1099 him. I really would like to get him legal. He's such a great guy. His kids are amazing. They're at Harvard, whatever it is, I've got these sensitive stories. And what do I do? And I go, okay, how did they enter into the United States? Well, either legally and they've been here for 5 or 6 years and overstayed their visa, or they walked across the border one time. And I'm like, I can't help you at all. They have to have a spouse that's a U.S. citizen or a parent that's a U.S. citizen. They need a waiver no matter what they do. They will never have any solution to their case unless they leave the country for 10 years.
Wow.
So there's zero solution.
Wow.
So even if people are trying to legalize people here, they can't. Yeah. So I get companies all the time, and they're great people, great bosses, great things, great people that say, hey, I want to do this the right way. So they have the right motivations. Please let me help. And maybe it's their neighbor, maybe it's an employee, maybe it's somebody they know. This person's such a great person. I want to make them legal. And I say, I can't do anything. But the only people you can bring are those people that have never been here. So they're not going to have any relationship with them, obviously.
Yeah.
So they got to pick and...
If I'm thinking about this, like this is just sort of my layman's interpretation of the things we've talked about today. I'm going to say the things that I will promote when I'm having conversations with people, right? My senator or whatever, is to say, we need to increase funding so we can increase staff, so we can get more people working cases, so that we should eliminate the bureaucracy, the bureaucratic delays due to shortage of
judges, officers.
Yeah. Because we are now, that is a massive incentive to stay here illegally. That de-incentivizes, to me, that's a good step towards, hey, if we can speed this process up, the legal pathway, if we can speed that up by just hiring people. And then the second thing was, making that court, I don't know if independent is the right word, but independent, make that court independent so that it can be more efficient and, be more consistent. So lawyers and people going through the legal system, once again, speeds things up.
And I'm going to add one more, because I think the first one that you mentioned won't work if we don't increase the numerical limit.
Yeah, the numerical limit. That was the third one I was going to say too.
Sometimes they'll open up a little bit more for certain very specific categories.
Like I feel like if I was trying to negotiate immigration reform, I would do those 3 things. And I would say, look, these should be no-brainers because they're all things that de-incentivize illegal immigration. Both sides want more illegal immigration for different reasons. And I'm like, so this is de-incentivizing illegal immigration. I would much rather see in the news, We just in the last month we allowed let's say 50,000 people to come here on, what's it called?
H-1B, yeah.
H-1B, which when you understand the requirements for that, you're like, well, that means we're doing fantastic as a country, because that means there's a lot of jobs here. And guess what? Those are American jobs.
Yeah.
They're not being sent off to a foreign country. That means more taxes, that more tax revenue, whatever. And you can control that a lot better because, like you said, the vetting just for the company to be able to apply to get.
And there's procedures even for that. Like, don't get the impression that a company like Intel or whatever else who hires a lot of H-1Bs are then not hiring American employees, because there's actually these monetary penalties if you have a certain amount of H-1B employees.
That's what I'm saying.
You got to pay a bunch of fees and whatever else. So they truly need it because they're paying through the nose to get these people here. Yeah. That's how much they need this labor and this there's a shortage, and especially in our STEM industries, in the tech industries, India's killing us. Whoops.
Yeah.
And that's maybe an education argument, but we need them in order to keep up with all the things we want to keep up with as a world power. We're going to need them. And I think to sum up, I love the argument of let's de-incentivize people from coming into the United States, and that's a border problem in my opinion. Part of it. My biggest issue is I want to know my enemy, if that makes sense. And to me, a known enemy is a lot easier to deal with than an unknown enemy. And I don't mean to call the immigrant community an enemy, but I just mean if you're forcing people, and there are goods and bads there. For the majority of my clients, I love every one of my clients. I've had some interesting ones. Yeah. I'm not going to hide from the fact that I've seen and dealt with narco traffickers and not represented them, but through my industry, it's just common. So there are bad but I would rather know who they are. I'd rather be able to track them and be able to. I just don't get the whole. Let's keep
them in the shadows.
In the shadows, it just doesn't make any sense to me, because I want to be able to know who I'm dealing with.
And so these people you keep talking about, they've been here for decades. They've got a job, they've got a family, they're being productive, contributing to society. But because they're in an illegal status, they're actually doing harm in the sense, some people would say, well, the tax thing, well, you're like, well, maybe the payroll tax is being taken out, but then, there are things there where if they were actually citizens, and I would say,
even if it was work authorization,
even if it doesn't even have to be
doesn't have to be an amnesty program, right? But some way to,
because then we're keeping track of them. We know where they're there. We can collect taxes. We can, a lot of these arguments that you're saying,
and my constituency, my clientele, they don't want to be in the shadows. They're forced into the shadows, but they come to me all the time and say, give me any option to be able to work legally. Yeah. Like, I just want to be able to work legally. I don't care if it costs me, I'll pay $10,000. I mean, I can't imagine the fees that the government could collect. Talk about funding applications. Yeah. If you're really worried about budgetary concerns for hiring more employees, charge $5,000 for an application. Now, I'm not advocating that. They're expensive, and my community has trouble paying their own, but they'll do it. Yeah. They will sacrifice whatever they want or whatever it is to incentivize them to do it legally. We just don't have that path. We have very few options for that path. We have options if you're outside of the country, which I get. Some of those options are 30 years in the wait. And now we're 10 and 12 years for even employment-based advanced degree type of people. That's ridiculous. So caps and numerical caps are way archaic.
That just seems like such a low-hanging fruit. And then if you can increase the workforce to get through these things faster, we're not solving the immigration problem. We're not solving the de-incentivizing. We're not fixing the border. But those things just seem like, why aren't those happening now? Like to
me, logistically, they just make sense.
They make sense.
And they're, like you said, they're not permanent fixes. They haven't eliminated everybody. But I think you've made it national security a little bit easier. Yeah. I think you bring assimilation into that argument a little bit, which is some of the contrary arguments. Yeah. I don't see the harm, honestly, of DACA becoming a permanent program. Right. These are now kids that have had these work authorizations for 10 years. Yeah. And I think you've got a real detriment because you've got a real educated, really motivated political body in these dreamers. Right. And then take it all away from them, and they're going to raise they're going to raise hell a little bit.
Yeah,
too.
that just seems like a
and I don't see
bad.
I don't see the benefit of that. I know the argument is, once we set precedent with one executive policy, then we open the door for other ones.
Yeah.
And both presidents did that the
Yeah.
last time. Trump used the argument of President Obama, and Biden's using both of their arguments and all the executive orders that they did. I get it, but I think it's time for Congress to step up and stop throwing other things into the DACA program and just make it permanent.
Just make it permanent.
So, yeah, there's some solutions out there, I think.
Because the reality of immigration is we're never going to get to the idealism on either side of the issue. It's just not reality.
Nope.
As long as America is a fantastic place to live, people are going to come here. They're going to come here illegally. They're going to come here legally. And so...
we want to curb it the way we can, we can control it. And I think there's ways to control it. And unfortunately, we've just become so far, whether it be on this end or this end, there's no middle ground in that. So there's no solutions. I mean, President Biden's proposal was to make DACA permanent and really push Congress to do it. I've seen zero effort I'm going to criticize him a little bit on that end. And he's a very pro-immigration
he's been getting
president.
a lot of,
but we've had zero movement on that. And I think that has bipartisan support. In fact, I know it does. I've seen the polls and whatever else. Most people support it.
Yeah.
But again, every time Congress gets a hold of it, and maybe it's not President Biden's problem, maybe it's Congress, but every time they get a hold of it, they try and sneak things in and it dies. And there's been 8 or 9 proposals that have all died.
Yeah. And the sad thing is they're not dying because of the core policy. They're dying for the little attachments that they're throwing in there. Yeah, I'll pass that if you add this. Yep. You add this bridge or whatever it is,
Everybody wants their concessions.
Yeah, which is a whole separate issue.
Yeah, that's politics in and of itself. We're not getting a lot done right now for that exact issue. And immigration's not unique to that.
Yeah. Oh, well, you have been so informative to me today. And those of you watching, hopefully or had your mind blown a few times and have a little bit better understanding of the challenges that we face and some really kind of painfully obvious solutions that would help us. I don't want to say a little bit. Help us significantly with, a certain group of people, that shouldn't be waiting 15 years or 5 years or 6 years,
Yeah, I would say ignoring the entire problem. Let's fix at least part of it.
Yeah, fix me part of it. Well, thank you so much for coming today.
And I don't want anybody, those that are watching as well, I've made it pessimistic because this is the topic of the conversation.
Right.
I do good work and there are solutions for some. So if anybody feels like they want to, pass by a proposition to me, I'm happy to give you an honest answer. Thanks,
okay. And be sure to check out, what's your website?
So westoverlawfirm.com is pretty easy. That one's,
if you're in Arizona, this is your guy.
Yeah. And even just Googling the firm, we've got.
But you said you have clients all over the world.
Oh yeah. We've got public. Yeah. So especially on the business side of things, we've got clients, from Saudi Arabia to
I'd hire you. You're amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and who knows, maybe we'll have you back on if things start getting crazy and bring you back on to talk, give your opinion on it again. So
thanks so much.
All right.